You don't break free by changing everything around you. You break free the moment something inside you shifts and never returns to how it used to operate. That's the secret no one tells you. Reality doesn't change because your job changes, or your relationship changes, or you finally get the house, the income, the body you wanted. Reality collapses when you shift, energetically, mentally, emotionally, on the inside. And there are 3 specific internal shifts that, once activated, don't just change your perspective. They make your previous life feel like a dream you can't go back to. These shifts aren't strategies. They're not mindset hacks. They are frequency upgrades. Once they happen, the people, patterns, and places that once matched your old vibration simply can't stay. Not because you force them out, but because there's nothing left in you to hold the illusion together. That's how powerful your internal state is. And here's the wild part. It can happen in a moment. One realization, one deep breath of truth, one clear decision that echoes from your cells to the sky. And suddenly, the matrix you thought was real, the rules, the roles, the rhythms of your day, begin to dissolve. Not because the world changed, but because your wiring did. You become incompatible with the lies that once comforted you. You stop feeding the dynamics that once defined you. And what's left? Space. Space for something real. Space for a new frequency to rise. Space for the version of you that was always waiting behind the noise. These 3 shifts aren't things you do, they're things you become. And once you become them, your old life has no choice but to fall away. Not with violence, but with inevitability. Because truth always reclaims its place once you let it in. The first internal shift is brutal in its simplicity. You stop needing your pain to mean something. For so long, you've clung to your suffering as proof of your depth, your struggle as validation of your worth, your chaos as identity. You've worn your wounds like armor, defended your limitations with passion, repeated your trauma stories like they were sacred chants. Why? Because the pain gave shape to your world. It gave you something to belong to, something to explain why you feel so different, so disconnected, so misunderstood. But then the shift comes, not with drama, not with fanfare, but like a soft, quiet knowing that says, I don't need this anymore. Not because it wasn't real, but because I'm done defining myself by it. And in that moment, everything starts to unravel. The false strength built from surviving begins to dissolve. The identity wrapped around being broken begins to fade. And something else, a deeper, quieter power, begins to rise. It's not loud. It's not theatrical. It's calm. It's the power of someone who doesn't need to be saved or seen or understood anymore. Someone who's no longer afraid to let go of the pain, because they've finally realized they are more than the story that's been protecting them. And as that shift settles in, your reality begins to respond. The people who only knew how to connect with your wounds begin to fall away. The patterns built on self-sabotage and emotional addiction start to crack. The environments that once mirrored your inner chaos now feel heavy, out of sync, foreign, because you're not vibrating there anymore. You've moved, quietly, completely, and there's no going back. You didn't heal your past. You transcended your need to be defined by it. That's the first collapse. That's the first door opening. And on the other side, a level of freedom you were never supposed to reach while still playing by the rules of your old identity. The second shift is harder to spot, but once it happens, you'll feel it ripple through everything. You stop outsourcing authority over your inner world. For most of your life, you've been taught to look outward for answers, for validation, for direction. Parents, teachers, religious figures, influencers, even your closest friends. You've handed pieces of your sovereignty to anyone who sounded confident enough. And it made sense, didn't it? You were never taught how to trust your inner signal. You were taught to conform, to obey, to seek approval from systems that only cared about control. But something begins to crack the moment you realize that no one outside of you actually knows what you came here to do. No one has your blueprint. No one feels what you feel when you're alone with your truth. And in that realization, a shift happens, not as a rebellion, but as a reclamation. You stop asking for permission to feel what you feel. You stop needing others to co-sign your path. You stop explaining your evolution to people who are still invested in the version of you that kept them comfortable. And as that inner authority activates, you begin to see how much of your life was built on borrowed beliefs, how many dreams you inherited instead of chose, how many fears were programmed into you by people who never healed their own. You start deconstructing the mental architecture of your old self, the rules you lived by, the limits you swore were facts, the voices in your head that never belonged to you in the first place. And once those voices quiet down, there's space to hear something else, your own. It doesn't shout, it doesn't plead, It speaks with a calm certainty that cuts through the noise like a tuning fork. That voice is your compass now, not your conditioning, not your culture, not your tribe, you. And the moment you fully trust it, your external world has to adapt, because you're no longer a reflection of others' projections. You become the source of your own signal. And the universe? It doesn't reward you for obeying, it synchronizes with your coherence. The third shift is the one that changes the game completely. You stop mistaking familiarity for safety. This is the most deceptive illusion of all, the belief that just because something feels familiar, it must be right or safe or meant for you. It's the reason you stayed in that relationship long after it stopped nurturing your soul. It's the reason you kept looping in jobs that drained your spirit. It's why you returned to the same emotional patterns, the same coping mechanisms, the same internal prisons, because they felt like home. But here's the truth most people avoid. Not everything that feels like home is healthy, especially when home was built on survival. And the moment this realization hits you, really hits you, your nervous system doesn't know what to do at first, because it's been wired to equate repetition with protection. But once the fog lifts, you begin to see clearly. Your old life wasn't safe. It was just predictable. And predictable pain can start to feel like love when you've never experienced real freedom. That's the shift. When you stop romanticizing struggle, when you stop interpreting chaos as passion, when you stop calling emotional instability deep connection, you realize that what you thought was love was actually trauma bonding, that what you called purpose was actually performance, that what you thought was your personality was just your coping. And when that shift clicks, it's disorienting. You start questioning everything. You begin noticing how many of your preferences weren't chosen. They were inherited, shaped by environment, reinforced by dysfunction. You feel like a stranger in your own life. But instead of panicking, you get curious. You sit with the discomfort. You let it strip you down to what's real. And what's left is a raw, sacred truth. You are not here to repeat what broke you. You are here to rewire what held generations captive. And that can't happen if you keep confusing your cage for a comfort zone. So you walk out, not with rage, but with reverence. And the world you built on wounds starts to crumble, making room for a life built on choice. If you've ever mistaken pain for purpose or silence for safety, subscribe and hit the bell. This isn't about changing your life. It's about reclaiming the one that was always yours. And now that the illusion is cracked, you begin to see what alignment truly requires. Subtraction. Not more ideas, more practices, more philosophies, but less. Less noise, less pretending, less clinging to things that numb you from hearing your own truth. This is the phase where most people try to rebuild too fast. They get uncomfortable with the void, with the space that opens up after the collapse. But if you move too quickly, you'll fill that space with replicas of your old reality, new faces, same frequency. And you didn't come this far to replay a different version of the same story. So you pause, you breathe, you sit in the rawness of not knowing, and slowly you begin to distinguish between what your soul craves and what your ego demands. Your soul whispers simplicity, coherence, truth. Your ego screams for recognition, distraction, validation. And with every honest choice, the signal becomes clearer. You start to feel what resonates. You start to sense when your body expands versus when it contracts. You learn to trust discomfort when it comes with expansion. And you stop interpreting ease as laziness when it's actually alignment. Everything sharpens. The way you speak changes. Less explanation, more presence. The way you listen deepens. Less filtering, more intuition. The way you exist becomes medicine to the very spaces that once silenced you. And as your inner world reorganizes, your outer world has no choice but to catch up. People will say you've changed. Some will fall away. Some will test your old identity, hoping you'll return to the version of you that kept them comfortable. But you won't. Not out of resistance, but because that version no longer exists. You didn't just change your thoughts, you changed your signal. And now, the only thing that fits is what honors it. That's how your old reality collapses, not with chaos, but with clarity. Now here's where everything gets dangerous in the best way possible, because after the collapse and subtraction comes the expansion. But this expansion doesn't look like what you were taught to expect. It's not explosive, it's not even dramatic. It's subtle, almost quiet, like a pulse that starts deep in your core and radiates outward in waves too sacred to measure. You don't wake up with fireworks, you wake up feeling clear, not certain, but clear. There's a difference. Certainty is of the mind. Clarity is of the soul. And with this clarity, you begin to live from resonance. You no longer chase ideas. You feel into them. You no longer convince yourself into relationships. You lean into their energy and let it tell you the truth. You no longer need guarantees. You move because the moment itself carries a kind of knowing you can't explain but refuse to betray. This is where coherence becomes your baseline. The inner world and the outer world start syncing, not because you forced it, but because you stopped fragmenting yourself just to belong in spaces never meant for your truth. You begin noticing how much you used to dilute yourself, how often you smiled while your gut twisted, how many dreams you abandoned just to maintain a fragile sense of peace. And now, you don't do that anymore. You don't shrink your light. You don't mute your knowing. You don't delay your movement. Because every time you say yes to what aligns and no to what doesn't, your entire field shifts. Your timeline shifts. The people you attract shift. And you stop wondering when it'll all fall apart again. Because you're not building on illusions anymore. You're building on truth. And truth doesn't require hustle to maintain. It requires only presence, only honesty, only your willingness to stop betraying yourself for comfort. And when you live from this space, what once looked like ambition starts to feel like distortion. Because now, you're not chasing your next level, you're receiving it. At this point, you stop trying to convince the world of anything, because the world is already responding to your frequency. You no longer hustle for belonging because you've become the home you were always looking for. You don't chase meaning and achievements because everything you touch is already encoded with intention. You don't panic in the unknown because the unknown is no longer a threat. It's a canvas, waiting for the signature of your alignment. And what's wild is how the smallest things begin to feel divine. The way the light hits your skin in the morning, the way your breath feels fuller, the way silence becomes nourishing instead of awkward. You no longer need permission to rest. You no longer seek applause to feel valid. You no longer wait for signs to act. You are the sign. This is the moment your energy stops negotiating, not because you're cold, not because you're superior, but because you've remembered what coherence feels like, and anything less now feels foreign. And when old patterns try to return, you don't fight them, you observe them. You recognize their voice, you nod, you smile, and you walk past them like the echoes they are. You don't need to prove you've changed. Your presence does that for you. People start to notice something different, but they can't name it. It's not your clothes, your words, your choices. It's your field. It carries a calm defiance, a subtle radiance, a frequency that says, I no longer abandon myself for the comfort of others. And some will be magnetized by it. Some will project onto it. Some will try to pull you back into the script you've outgrown. But you don't move, because you've anchored. You're not floating. You're not seeking. You're rooted in something deeper than identity, deeper than belief. You're rooted in source. And when you walk like that, the path doesn't just open, it rearranges itself in response to you. Now the air feels different when you walk into a room, not because people treat you differently, but because you treat yourself differently. You're no longer scanning for approval, you're no longer shrinking to fit in, you're no longer absorbing the emotions of everyone around you like it's your job. Your boundaries are no longer built from fear, they're built from reverence. And when you say no now, it doesn't come with guilt, it comes with clarity. You start seeing how much of your old self was a performance, well-intentioned, maybe even necessary at one time, but no longer sustainable in a body that's returned to truth. You no longer feel obligated to explain your evolution. You've outgrown the need to narrate your growth for others' comfort. Silence becomes sacred, discernment becomes natural, and the more aligned you become, the less effort it takes to protect your peace because your very energy starts filtering out what doesn't belong. This is where your life gets simpler, but not smaller. In fact, it expands. But it expands inward before it expands outward. You realize joy doesn't come from what you accumulate, but from how deeply you inhabit the present. You realize love doesn't arrive when someone chooses you. It begins when you choose you. You realize power doesn't come from force, performance, or control, but from full spectrum presence. And from this place, you stop fearing loss, because nothing essential can ever leave you. What falls away now is excess, illusion, the echoes of who you thought you had to be. And what remains is so real, so solid, so you, that even when storms come, you don't flinch, you don't armor up, you listen, because the storms aren't punishments anymore, they're recalibrations. You've stopped asking, why is this happening to me? And started asking, what is this trying to restore in me? That's the voice of someone no longer surviving, but transmitting, and the world, it listens. You've come this far not because someone showed you the way, but because something inside you refused to stay asleep. You listened when your old life stopped making sense. You followed the subtle discomfort, the unexplainable longing, the tension between who you were and who you're becoming. And now here you are, not fixed, not finished, but real, aligned, whole. Not in the sense of perfection, but in the sense of integrity, where your insides match your outsides, where your truth no longer hides behind strategy or fear. You're not here to convince anyone of your worth. You're not here to shrink for spaces that can't hold your light. You're not here to repeat the same unconscious loops dressed in new vocabulary. You are here to embody a different signal, one that doesn't demand attention but commands resonance. And that signal? It doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be true. Because when you walk in truth, reality reorganizes, not overnight, not all at once, but undeniably. You stop trying to force things and start noticing how often the right doors open when you're simply aligned. You stop asking for signs because you've become fluent in the language of your own nervous system. You stop fearing solitude because solitude now feels like communion with the deepest parts of yourself. And when the world tries to hand you its old scripts, be useful, be likable, be less sensitive, be more productive, you hold your ground and say, I remember who I am now. And here's what matters. This version of you, the one who's no longer seduced by noise, no longer defined by wounds, no longer waiting for permission. This is the version the world has been aching for, not the polished you, not the performative you, the present you. So let me ask you something, right here, right now. What part of your old self are you done rehearsing? What truth have you been carrying in silence that's finally ready to be spoken? Don't just think it, drop it in the comments, because your words might just be the mirror someone else needs to recognize their own remembering. And this is how we build a field, one awakening at a time.